Good morning all. I'm Deputy Commissioner Wendy Steendam and we are here today to provide an update on a current sex crime squad investigation into a series of alleged sexual assaults linked to an employee at a childcare centre. I will say from the outset this is an incredibly distressing investigation and the information we are going to provide today is particularly confronting as it involves offences committed against some of our most vulnerable people in our community, being children. We also have a man who's been charged and is before the courts, so we are limited in what we can say. However, we have a number of important updates on behalf of Victoria Police that Acting Commander Janet Stevenson will provide. I also have the Chief Health Officer, Christian McGrath, here, who will provide some updates and instructions on behalf of the Department of Health. With that, I will now hand over to Acting Commander Janet Stevenson. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner Steendam. Victoria Police Sexual Crime Squad commenced an investigation in May this year after detectives discovered child abuse material. We immediately acted and executed a search warrant at the Point Cook home of a 26-year-old Joshua Brown. As a result, Brown was charged with over 70 offences which relate to alleged sexual assaults committed against 8 identified child victims. He was subsequently remanded in custody and will face the Melbourne Magistrates Court on the 15th of September. Brown was not known to police prior to this investigation. However, as soon as we identified his alleged offending, he was removed from the community. He had a valid Working with Children check, which has since been cancelled. I emphasise that these are allegations and the matter is now before the courts, so I won't be going into specifics. Our number one priority was to identify any potential victims and identify Brown's employment history so we could determine who may have been impacted. It has been established that he has worked at 20 childcare centres across Melbourne between January 2017 and May 2025. A full list of these impacted centres and the date range of when he was working there will be listed on a government website. I will shortly tell you exactly where those places were to remove all doubt. We're not suggesting that the accused has offended against children in all these centres, but we're encouraging anyone to come forward with any information to Crime Stoppers. At this stage, all of the alleged offending is believed to have taken place in Victoria. We do not believe that there is any other childcare employees who have been involved. Last week, we notified 8 families that we had charged Brown with sexually offending against their children. As you could imagine, this was deeply distressing for the families to hear. We worked with our partner agencies to put all supports in place to assist them through this difficult period. Today, a letter has been distributed on behalf of Victoria Police and the Department of Health to all the families that we believe had a child enrolled at the childcare centres that we have listed where Brown worked during the period of his employment. Those letters contain important instructions which the Chief Health Officer, Christian McGrath, will go into in more detail. If you have not been contacted, then it's highly unlikely that your child has been impacted. However, if you are concerned, there is a full list of these centres and the dates that he was employed there at the government website, and the Chief Health Officer will speak to that. I understand this information will be deeply concerning and come as a great shock to many of the community. We have a number of services in place for those who may have been impacted by this matter, and detectives will be working closely with the families of the victims to ensure they get all the support they need at this time. There will be people out there that hear this news today and they might have information that they wish to pass on to police. This may be families who had a child at the centre where he worked, or even staff that worked alongside the person. Again, we're not suggesting that the accused has offended against children in all these childcare centres, but we're encouraging anyone with any further information to contact Crime Stoppers or on their website. You can send an anonymous information if that is your choice. I can assure you that we will take every piece of information very seriously and it will be thoroughly assessed. Victoria Police has been working closely with a number of agencies as part of this investigation. That includes the Department of Health, the Commission for Children and Young Persons, Family Safety Victoria, Department of Families, Fairness and Housing, Gatehouse, Department of Education, the Royal Children's Hospital, to ensure that we give the right supports in place and that the families have given as much information as possible about the process. The investigation remains ongoing, and again, if you have any information, please contact Crime Stoppers. What I will do, I'm going to read out a list of the childcare centres. I'm not going to give you the dates of his employment. If that's required, please go to the website and there will be further information there. So the first one, Nino Early Learning Adventures in Point Cook, Explorers Early Learning in Point Cook, Adventurers Education Wyndham Vale, Only About Children in Williamstown, Wallaby Childcare Centre in Sanctuary Lakes, Nido Early Learning Centre in Werribee, Creative Gardens in Point Cook, Leopold World of Learning in Leopold, Greenwood in Point Cook, Little Blossoms Childcare Centre in Werribee, the DOTS Occupational Therapy for Children in Footscray, Aussie Kindies Learning Centre in Sunbury, Milestones Early Learning in Werribee, Milestones Early Learning in Hoppers Crossing, Papillo Early Learning in Hoppers Crossing, Kids Academy in Melton, Kids Academy in Kensington, Aussie Kindies Early Learning in Keilor, Papillo Early Learning in Essendon, and Milestones Early Learning in Bundoora. So I will now hand over to the Chief Health Officer, Christian McGrath, to give you further information about the health response. Thank you.
Thanks, Janet. This is a very complex and distressing matter, and our highest priority is on the health and wellbeing of the children and families involved. A health response has been stood up to ensure families are able to easily access health advice and the specialist supports we think they need. We've worked with Victoria Police to identify and contact around 2,600 families, parents, children and carers of children who have attended the relevant childcare centre over this the accused alleged offending working there. As a precaution, we are recommending that some children undergo testing for infectious diseases due to a potential exposure risk in that period. We do understand that this is another distressing element to the situation, and we're taking this approach as a precaution. We do believe it's a low risk, but we want to offer this to provide assurance to the parents about the health and wellbeing of their children. At this stage, we are recommending that around 1,200 children undergo testing for infectious diseases. Families and the wider community can be reassured that the infections that the children were potentially exposed to can be treated with antibiotics and that there's no broader public health risk to the community. A dedicated advice and support hotline has been set up to provide families and health with screening information, as well as linking them to specialist supports, including mental health and wellbeing services. When parents, guardians or carers call this number, they will be provided with health advice, including whether a testing is recommended for their children. We'll also support them to book in that testing, and it'll be provided free of charge. Not all children who attended the attended the childcare centres need to be tested because they did not attend the childcare centre when there was assessed to be an infection risk. Support is available for all these families, and we do encourage parents whose children did attend these childcare centres to call the dedicated advice line and seek further support. So while we are, as a reminder, we are directly contacting these families to let them know of the potential situation, we do have set up a website online. I'll just read that out for everyone. It's vic.gov.au/childcare-centres-investigations. where affected families can find further information. I do want to acknowledge it's a relatively complex public health response, acknowledging that there is an ongoing police investigation and that we are dealing with families' sensitive health information. I'll now hand over to the Premier.
Thank you, Christian. I'm sickened by these allegations of abuse. They are shocking and distressing, and my heart just breaks for the families who are living every parent's worst nightmare. And as a parent too, I can only imagine the unbearable grief and pain the affected families are experiencing right now. Every health and mental health support will be provided to these families, and families who may have been affected have already been contacted directly, and as we've heard, a dedicated hotline has been set up to provide advice and support. An individual is now in police custody and the matter is before the courts, and I do not want to say anything that will compromise justice being done on this matter. But I do know that as a parent, this will be felt far beyond those immediate families that are affected, and that families across Victoria will be horrified, will be angry and frightened. Can I also say that our educators and carers in our early childhood education sector will also be shocked. And I want to make it clear to our early childhood education workforce that the allegations, that I know the alleged actions and allegations of a single individual do not reflect the many dedicated and professional childcare educators and carers and staff who go above and beyond every day to teach and care for our children. The specifics of this case are being thoroughly investigated by police and are being examined by the courts. The safety of our children is our #1 priority. The Early Childhood Regulator will immediately commence an investigation into the conduct of the early education providers in which the alleged offender has worked. And Minister Lizzie Blanthorne has been working closely already with Commonwealth officials, Commonwealth ministers and other state and territory governments to implement national changes to improve safety, to strengthen regulation and to increase penalties. If there are further changes we can make out of the police investigation, out of the regulator's investigation, or the work that the Minister is undertaking with her colleagues, then we will take every action within our power to keep Victorian children safe. In finishing, I do too want to acknowledge and thank the Victoria Police officers, the public health officials, and so many others who've been working tirelessly to support the affected families in what is the most distressing of times. I'll now hand back to Acting Commander Janet Stevenson.
I'm happy to take questions, but again, I'll be limited in what answers I can provide. We have to ensure that we don't compromise the investigation or the court hearing.
How long was the time that the first accusation was made and he was pulled out of childcare centres? How quickly did that happen?
So this is a proactive investigation. So it occurred very quickly. I won't go into the full details, but as soon as we were aware, as I said, he was arrested and remanded in custody.
Why the lag of the 6 weeks in notifying people?
So we actually had to identify the victims involved. It was very complex. As I said, it was a proactive investigation. It wasn't through someone's complaint. We didn't have a victim for quite some time. As soon as we had identified the known victims, we put things in place. We had to make sure the support services, being the Royal Children's Hospital, all other health areas, were all prepared with a process that would be seamless and provide all those supports. So that took quite some time to do the known victims. And then we had to put in place, particularly this hotline, to give all the people that will be receiving these notifications today a very seamlessly smooth process so that they would get all the supports that they required.
You said this was a proactive investigation. How did you become aware of the offending?
I'm not going to go into that either, but just doing our general detective work.
So a bit of a red flag that this bloke's worked at 20 different childcare centres in such a
short space of time?
Oh, it's over from 2017 to 2025. It's not a really short period of time, and some of the ones that I've named, he was only there for a very short period of time. They do relief work like emergency teachers would. So you might find when you look at the date range, he was only at some places for a very short period of time.
Does he work for an agency?
I'm not aware of that.
Is there a reason the suppression was lifted on his identity, on his name?
Today,
Yeah.
yes, we felt that it was really important. This is unique. It's very important to ensure that every parent out there that has a child in childcare knows who he is and where he worked. So it was an unusual decision, but it is before the courts, and so it is actually public knowledge.
Is there any evidence that complaints had previously been made about him, including to the department or staff?
So at this point, he wasn't known to police. Part of our investigation will uncover any complaints that were made, but my understanding, there was no formal complaints in relation to this individual.
And you said he hadn't worked in other states. Had he come from another state?
Not that we're aware of.
You had to tell some parents that their children were victims?
Yes, so last week we had to inform the families of those 8 victims what had occurred to their child while in childcare. It was very challenging and of course very distressing for the families. Our detectives are very trained in that area, but I'm not saying it was easy, it was very difficult. But they have been given all the wraparound supports that they need.
Of the 70 charges that were sort of named in the press release, do they relate to all the 8 identified victims, or are there other potential victims in those that relate to those 70 charges?
Basically, they all relate to those 8 victims.
So there could be more charges?
Well, the investigation is ongoing, so I'm not sure where that will lead us at this point in time.
There's no good way to ask this. Are we talking infants or toddlers?
So the date range of the 8 victims was between 5 months and 2 years old.
Premier, can I ask you? Sorry, I'll question on notice. Are you confident in the system in terms of working with children check? Parents who are sending their kids to childcare. Can you give? Do you have confidence in the system right now?
Look, Richard, these allegations that have been outlined today by Victoria Police are absolutely shocking and distressing. And the question you're asking is the question that every parent is asking right now. It's a question I'm asking as well. And that they are questions that do need to be answered and will be guided by the investigation being undertaken by Victoria Police and also the investigation that is also commenced by the regulator, because parents do deserve answers to these questions. The safety of our kids when we place them in the care of professional centres has to be of paramount importance. And again, though, I do want to emphasise that this is allegations against one individual. And I think it's important to remember today that alongside parents who are feeling just sick to the stomach, like we all are at hearing this news, there are also too, that is a feeling that is being shared by the early childhood educators and staff who are professional, who are caring, who work so hard caring for kids across a range of early childhood centres, and they also should be in our thoughts as well, because they'll equally be shocked. And the allegations against this one individual by no means is a reflection on the work that is done across the sector.
Are the working with children checks, is it robust enough, the system? Does it need to be strengthened?
So,
Issues put by my colleagues.
Yeah. So we've already been I'll start that again. We've already undertaken a rapid review that commenced in April, and changes are being introduced from next month around strengthening the worker screening. But I do want to re-emphasise the points that Victoria Police have made, that this alleged offender was not known to Victoria Police and did have a working with children check. So this will be also a feature of the work that will come from both the Victoria Police investigation and from the investigation being undertaken by the regulator. And again, these are questions that every single parent wants and deserves answers to. And I make it absolutely clear that as a result of those investigations, as a result of the work that the Minister is already undertaking, if there is further strengthening and actions we can do on top of the actions that have already been taken, increasing penalties, strengthening the regulation, we will take that further action.
There's a childcare educated to child ratio, I think it's like 1 to 4, especially at that younger age.
Yep.
How is it that someone's able to be alone with
Well,
children? In our childcare centres, like
yeah.
your kids have been in childcare, my kids have been in childcare, the rooms aren't that small.
So Heidi, that's again, that questions that you've asked, that Richard's asked, these questions are absolutely the questions that parents are being asked around the state. However, in answering that question, that would go to, that would potentially compromise the investigation being undertaken by Victoria Police. And I think we can all appreciate that there is nothing I will say or do here today to compromise that investigation that would bring about justice in this instance.
Is there any can you elaborate on what the infectious disease might be? Or
Look, I'll hand over to the Chief Health Officer, noting again, we appreciate that there is a deep desire for further information, and questions are being asked by parents because everyone is sickened by these allegations of abuse. The answers to these questions, though, have to be very carefully put today to not compromise the ongoing investigation of Victoria Police. Christian.
Yeah, thank you, Premier. We're not intending to talk through the actual types of infections at this point in time, noting that, this is a very distressing situation. There is a complex police investigation ongoing, but also just acknowledging this is, pretty sensitive private health information for the family. So we really want to give the opportunity to respect those families, their right to privacy and their health and wellbeing put at the top, basically.
How did you come to the 1,200 number that you'd like to see tested as opposed to the more than 2,000 at the centres?
Yeah, no, understood. So I guess in that we had to consider all the available information to us as part of that investigation. Again, I can't speak too much about that, but we've been very careful. I think it's fair to say, out of an abundance of caution, we've made these recommendations, that they're quite conservative, quite safe recommendations, because we really do want to offer families that reassurance that those who may be who are eligible for screening are those at risk. We're reasonably confident, I'll say we're very confident actually, based on data information we have, that those who haven't been identified for screening need screening for infectious diseases.
I imagine a lot of parents might see this and still want to take them for testing, regardless if they're in that 1,200. Is that something that you would recommend?
Look, I absolutely understand that. This is a horrible, confronting, distressing situation, and this adds a more distressing element to it. I do encourage them to call the advice line. They'll be provided those details through the contact letter, and to speak with their own health care practitioner.
How long do you anticipate it would take to test the 1,200 families, and how long will families have to wait for testing?
Yeah, no, it's a very good question. We're doing our absolute best to facilitate that testing, because obviously this is a recommendation under very distressing circumstances. We really want to make it as least traumatic for families as possible. So we are organising direct referrals to centres around Melbourne to organise that testing, and coordinating with the laboratories to ensure that turnaround of the testing time is as quick as possible. It's hard for me to say how quickly it'll be that those children are tested, because it will obviously depend on families working with their families, with their children and the families to present for testing. But we are trying to make it easier.
Days, weeks, months?
Look, I'd expect days to weeks.
So have some of those 8 children tested positive to infectious disease?
I'm not going to comment on any of the children who are already part of the police investigation, obviously.
This may be more of a question for police. Has the accused himself been tested for STIs, and what was the result?
Look, I think that's private health information. It's not something I'm going to talk about in public.
This might be a question for police as well, but was the accused, when he was arrested and charged, was he compliant? I mean, did he put forth the information about the victims themselves, or was that through investigation?
We clearly had some information from our investigation, but he was cooperative with police.
Just to be clear, he was a childcare worker, not an admin, not a cleaner.
No, he was a childcare worker at the time of his arrest. He may have held other roles throughout his employment, though.
Did the information come to light? Was it online content that brought him to your attention?
I won't go into the details, but what he has been charged with is possessing and producing child abuse material.
Are you able to indicate whether any other children were in the vicinity when these assaults took place?
Again, it's getting a little bit too much into the detail, which is before the court at the moment.
I have another question for the Premier, if anyone, that's all right. Premier, just on the, do you support like the idea of the Australian Child Foundation to make child abuse detection training mandatory as part of working with children checks, as part of getting that check?
Well, I'll answer that, but perhaps also ask the Minister to add to my comments, because I think this is one of a number of pieces of advice that is already being provided to federal and state ministers as they work through the national framework that sits across this, the early childhood sector, and how we should always be looking at ways to strengthen that framework, to strengthen the regulation, and recommendations around additional training is one of those recommendations that we will examine. We also will examine, as I've said a number of times this morning, the advice that will come through the investigation, the advice that will come from the police investigation and the investigation by the early childhood regulator into what did happen in these 20 centres. The questions you are asking today go to some of the practices within those early childhood centres that do need to be answered, do need to be understood, and look at where there needs to be a further strengthening of the system, because the safety of kids in these settings is just of such paramount importance. And also too, it goes to saying very clearly to parents, we understand that there is a need here to look at what happened, to understand what happened and strengthen the regulations. But Lizzie, did you want to add to those comments? Thank you.
Thanks, Premier. Thanks, Richard, for your question. And at the outset too, can I acknowledge what a difficult day this is for families. It's only 18 months ago that my own little one was in childcare, so I very personally understand the level of trust that you put in these types of in these places, in terms of being able to safely drop your children off in the morning so that you can do your job, and happily pick them up again in the afternoon knowing that they've been well cared for. And as the Premier indicated, in the majority of cases, and with the vast majority of our workforce, that is absolutely the case, and I pay tribute to them as well. I know that this will be particularly distressing news for those who work with children. Obviously, as the Premier said, and as is our obligation under the United Nations Declaration on the Human Rights of the Child, child safety is, of course, the paramount concern, and the best interests of the child at every level, from their cultural safety to their physical safety, is our absolute priority. Childcare is regulated in a national context. We, by national agreement, have a national framework. We have national quality standards, and we have a national agreement that commits all of the states and territories to national law, of which Victoria is the host. It's complex, but there has been occasion over the last period of time in which jurisdictions have questioned the adequacy of the national law and have been working with the Commonwealth on how we can improve it. Just on Friday, we had an Education Ministers meeting in South Australia with Minister Clare and Walsh, where the jurisdictions spoke to what it is that we would like to see as improvements. There have been some improvements, and when we talk about devices, that's a really good example of where we've brought in regulations around, we're in the process of bringing in regulations, but have already issued a requirement that personal devices, for example, not be allowed within the centre. There's other work that is currently underway as well, work that the states and territories have lobbied extensively for, such as tying the payment of childcare subsidy to the performance, particularly in relation to quality and standards in each of the services. It is a complex area, and it is an area that where complexity is added to by the mix of providers across the system, from the types of care and also the types of providers from for-profit through to community-based services. But what is really clear, and what was really clear at our Education Ministers meeting on Friday, is that the best interests of the child have to be the number one consideration in all aspects of the application of the national law. We did also commit to having another meeting in September to bring forward much of the work plan that, in the view of jurisdictions, and I express this view myself, is moving too slow. One of the areas, for example, and to go to one of the earlier questions, that I would like to see brought forward, and that Victoria has said we're going to effectively implement in our own way anyway, is a national system of registration for workers. So teachers are already required to be registered with the Victorian Institute of Teaching. Educators are not. So there are things that we are working with the Commonwealth on bringing forward so that we can address these issues in the future.
Why are security cameras mandatory?
They haven't been, but that is, again, one of the issues that particularly coming out of the New South Wales review, which they responded to last week, and which a number of us discussed on Friday.
Parents will be asking, what's taking so long? Like, if that review's found that cameras should be in there, what's taking so long?
It's a really valid question. That review was responded to last week, but it is also a question that we're asking as well. It is a national regulatory framework, and there is national regulations, national standards, national law. But what we can absolutely commit to looking at is what other things that we can do in the meantime, at the same time as bringing the Commonwealth with us on the national reforms.
So there's no scope to go it alone on security cameras?
That's one of the things that remains under consideration.
So I'm still not clear on that. Can the state go it alone on security cameras?
There would be changes necessary within the national regulatory framework to allow that to happen. What we're seeking some advice on is what can we also move on in an immediate sense.
But security cameras would be a...
That would need to be, that is being considered in the national context.
Have the regulators failed to enforce some of these rules? Do we need a stronger regulator?
To be clear, the accused has been found through an active police investigation, so I want to be absolutely clear about that. We will also, now with the authorisation of Victoria Police, begin a required investigation. Our early childhood regulator will do their own investigation to establish that the providers have been compliant with the regulations. I would at the outset though say that we exceed our targets in relation to inspection and compliance. So there hasn't as such been any evidence that they're not doing their job, but we are immediately going to move to an investigation to establish if there has been any others.
Find out about this, Minister?
Again, I was briefed on it a couple of weeks ago.
But the investigation's only just starting now, the one you can carry at your...
As the Premier said, we haven't wanted to do anything from a Department of Education perspective that would in any way compromise the police investigation. As soon as we are able to, we are immediately moving to a quiet investigation.
But weren't charges already... Wasn't there arrest already made?
There is a memorandum of understanding between the Department of Education and Victoria Police as to how these types of investigations will be managed. Now that we have the authorisation, we will be immediately moving to a quiet investigation.
Who will head that up, and what's the timeline?
Our early childhood regulator will head that up.
Yeah, and timeline for it?
It will begin immediately.
Over how long?
Well, in consultation with police and the other information available, obviously there's an active investigation. As the Premier said, we don't want to do anything that would compromise that. We'll work in with that investigation to also complete our own investigations.
What did you think when you first heard about it?
Like any parent, Heidi, I was absolutely horrified. As I said, it's only 18 months ago that I was dropping my own daughter at a childcare centre, and as the Premier indicated, the majority of our workforce are hard-working people who are doing the best and have the best interests of the children at heart each and every day, and my heart goes out to them, as well as it does in particular to all of the families who put that trust in their services and in their workers to deliver a service for them that enables them to go to work and do their job, and then to have this happen is an absolute violation of that trust.
And you're confident there's no failings at your department level in this?
As I indicated, we'll now immediately move to a quiet investigation where they will apply the necessary scrutiny to establish whether there was anything that could have been done differently or if not.
Just for Victoria Police, if I can, obviously this is a really gruesome investigation. Would you say that within Victoria Police this is one of the worst cases of child offending that you've seen, offences against children rather, that you've seen?
Any case of child abuse is abhorrent. Clearly our thoughts are with every family that has to go through this. I won't compare this to any other investigation. What I can say, it's complex and will take some time to complete it.
Just wanted to ask, are the 8 identified victims boys and girls, or just boys, just girls?
I really don't want to give that information. It's private. We want to protect their identity as much as we can. Thank you very much, and thanks for your assistance. It's really important. Thank you.